Good morning, day 7, and it is glorious. We've got blue skies. Let me turn my phone around so you can see here for a minute. Wow. And I live across the street from a golf course, even though I am not personally a golfer, but it does make for a beautiful, I'm very fortunate, very beautiful view. And it is January 7th, and it's a mild day, and so the golfers are out there. They are a special breed. Anyway, we're sprinting through Genesis, I know, and thank you for sprinting with me. And sometimes it's good, even though the Bible is written where you could literally, and people have throughout the centuries, written books even on just a verse or a chapter or a paragraph. Sometimes reading big chunks at a time is a good thing to do as well, and so that you can zoom out. It's good to zoom in. This is what's just beautiful and practical about the Bible. It is a psychological roadmap for life, how to live this human life and notice patterns of behavior that we have, and what work well for people and what don't, what doesn't. And so anyway, Genesis chapters 26 through 36. So 10 chapters, and we're going to finish tomorrow with the rest of Genesis. But today was the story of Jacob. Jacob was one of Isaac's sons, and Jacob and Esau. There's so many stories. I'm going to try to give you a high-level flyby, but Jacob had an older brother named Esau. Similar to Cain and Abel, the younger brother ends up getting the blessing of the father, and Esau sells his birthright for a bowl of soup. He comes in after a day of hunting. You get the picture that he's sort of this big burly guy, capable warrior type, and he's the one that goes out and hunts. Jacob's a little, maybe not quite as strong. It actually makes references to, being hairy. Jacob was not, hairy. So there's this overall sense that he's just not quite as maybe manly or the big burly guy. But he comes in one day and he's so hungry, and Jacob's eating some soup, and he wants it, like he's ravenous. And in the heat of just that impulse of how he was feeling in the moment, he agreed. And Jacob was very strategic. He was like, oh, yeah, I wonder what I could get for this. So Esau willingly trades his birthright for a bowl of soup. And again, we have parallels that are showing up through these chapters. And then later, Rebecca, Jacob's mother and Isaac's wife, they plot together, Jacob and Rebecca do, as Isaac is laying in his bed and he's older and he's ready to pass on his fatherly blessing, and he wants to bless his firstborn Esau with that, but Rebecca devises a plot to have Jacob receive his father's blessings instead of Esau. So while Esau's out hunting, and he's hunting for wild game, evidently that's part of the ritual that has to happen. You've got to eat the wild game, the father does, before he gives the blessing. And so Jacob brings the meal. Isaac is, I guess, at the stage of his life where he can't really see. And so he can't tell that it's not Esau, but he notices it's not Esau's voice. And he's like, oh, this sounds like Jacob. But, they had devised a plan for even Esau or Jacob to have hairy arms. They took part of the goat skin, put it on his arm, and wearing Esau's clothes. And so Isaac is finally convinced, okay, even though this sounds like Jacob, okay, there's enough other evidence that contradicts that. I'm going to go with it, and I'm going to believe that this is Esau, even though it really wasn't. And then he gives Jacob his blessing. And, it's the promise of having descendants and, all this kind of stuff. So Esau gets home and then fixes the meal, brings it to his father. And then Isaac is like devastated. Esau is devastated. He's like, oh my gosh, I've already given the blessing to Jacob, and it can't be undone. So that's really interesting. Now, all of this is metaphorical to the story and the overall story for us as the reader. And again, it's this part of the dual, like the evolution of your consciousness and rising in the development of going from sort of basic lower man to higher man. And that's why we get this picture of Esau being the way he is versus Jacob, and even the mother coming in to be involved in the plot, and the father. So it's all about the inner human life, and the parts of us that wrestle with each other, and who wins out at the end of the day, who gets the blessing, and it's the higher consciousness. And so anyway, after that is over, Jacob strikes off on his own to go find his wife. He goes back, unlike what Isaac did, where a servant was sent to go get a wife. Jacob actually goes himself to their homeland to get a wife. And he goes to see his uncle, Laban. He immediately, when he's at the well getting water and stopping to feed his animals, meets Rachel. Falls in love immediately. They fall in love with each other. They go to get Laban's blessing to marry, and he asks permission, and Laban's says yes. He stays there, and they wait. And then at the very last minute, Laban says nope, and he sends Leah in to sleep with him before the wedding. Then he says nope, and you've got to marry Leah instead. She's the other sister. He doesn't love Leah, but he wants Rachel so bad that he's willing to go along with what her father has decided. And he says, I will work for 7 years if you will let me marry Rachel. And so thank you for bearing with me as I give you the high level overview of all of this. And you'll see if you read it for yourself that it is very high level Cliff Notes version, and in my words too. So anyway, he works for 7 years. So in exchange for that, then he gets to marry Rebecca a few days later, but agrees to work for 7 years for Laban. So now he's got 2 wives. He's got Rachel, but of course then there's jealousy between Leah and Rachel, very similar to what happened with his dad and Hagar and Sarah, sorry. So then we have, I've got to keep all these names straight, and it's like the family line. So, and make sure that I'm saying the right one. I'm like, oh yeah, I am. Okay. So anyway, we've got all of that going on. And then the 7 years is up, and he goes to Laban, and then Laban changes things on him again and says, nope, you got to stay another 7 years. And so he stays another 7 years. So then we're at 14 years. Then that comes up. He's ready to go again, and they're negotiating property and flocks, because that's what part of what Jacob did was take care of flocks, and he grew under his care and all of his work. He increased Laban's wealth, like I think he said it was like tenfold or something. So, but Laban is still kind of being stingy and like it's just not enough. And so so they work out a deal, and this time Jacob even offers, okay, here's what I'm going to do for you. And we're going to breed new animals, and those with spots and with stripes, I'll keep, and then you can have these. So they and even Laban goes to his sons and thinks that he's going to outsmart Jacob, but Jacob then has this technique of peeling bark off of trees and putting it in the trough and having them mate before it. It's all very strange and elaborate. But anyway, and him even offering that up to, in good conscience, grow his own flocks, so that, again, Laban couldn't take credit. So you got that theme that's coming down similarly from Isaac's story. And so he willingly signs up for 6 more years. This takes a while of, breeding and mating and growing new flocks and all those cycles of the animals having to reproduce and all of that. So 20 years go by, and he finally gets to set out on his own. He's built his own sort of little wealth and through possessions and his family. By then, the 2 women, and along with their 2 servants, he has a total of, I think it's like 14 or 15 children. 2 biologically with Rachel, and then 7 biologically with Leah, and then and then there were several more through the 2 servants. And by the way, there was another parallel story to the first one I told about selling something for soup. The 2 women, Rachel and Leah, the 2 sisters, they were having some jealousy and conflicts over Jacob and wanting more children and wanting to, have relations with him to make that happen. And one day, and Leah had some mandrakes and Rachel wanted them, so she pimped out her husband. Said, fine, if you want him that bad, then I need those mandrakes. And evidently mandrakes back then, I did look this up, mandrakes help with fertility. So they make out this deal. It was like, what? So we have these patterns of deal making and conniving and strategery to make things happen, and people even selling things that are very valuable and being impulsive about things. And don't we do that? Don't we do that? So many patterns here. So fast forward, Jacob's, heading back to make his own home near where his father was, grow a nation similar to the way Isaac did, have the promises and everything fulfilled. He is on the road with his big caravan of his family, his clan, his animals, his servants, like the whole shebang, this big traveling caravan. And he hears somebody comes and tells him, oh, your brother Esau is headed your way with like 400 men. And so he starts to get really scared and nervous. And so then he devises a plan. He splits up his caravan that, God forbid, if the worst happens, at least only half of his clan would be taken out, and maybe he can preserve the half. So again, thinks strategically. But in the midst of this, before he meets Esau, he has this moment, and this is what my whole spiel is about today. And I think I forgot to say that at the beginning: attitude of gratitude that Jacob has. So after we get this recounting of everything that happened with Laban, and 20 years, and getting the rug pulled out from under him, making agreements, and then the other person not living up to their end of the bargain, and then changing things. And then he goes along with it, because he's, again, kind of like his dad, focused on it and on a mission. He's not going to be deterred or easily swayed. And anyway, that is apparent. And so he has this quiet time with God, and he's just in a posture of gratitude, like, God, please protect me, protect my clan. I have done everything that you've asked, and look at and I walked away from my father's land, to go and make my way with only a walking stick. And here I am now, all these years later. Look at the wealth and the blessing that I have. So rather than focusing on and being focused on all that he could have been focused on, that we can get focused on too, is like how unfair, like I shouldn't have had to fight this hard. People shouldn't be doing this to me. Like I'm doing all of these things and honoring my part of the bargain. And here people are, like life happens. We do get deceived. We do get taken advantage of. Things aren't, we have expectations. Expectations don't get met for whatever reasons. And he just stayed true. And then I think this attitude of gratitude that he shows in this prayer to God, was just beautiful. I was like, wow. Because even when he was recounting, all of the things that Laban, was kind of unfair of, but yet he stayed in there and was a man of his word and did what he needed to do for the love of Rachel and even for his own future and blessing. And like, that is a blessing right there. That's a birthright and a blessing that we have, is to be grateful that life is happening always for us, not to us, but for us. And when we can have that, attitude, how much better our experience of life goes. Bitterness, anger, all of those types of emotions that could be maybe righteous, but if that's the way we decide to live our lives and go in that direction, how much different the outcomes could be. Versus Jacob chose to see that God, that life, that all of the events of it was God working through these things to bless him. Life was for him. God was for him. Wow. And there were a couple of other things I'll just make mention of as you're reading them. That he had a dream with a vision of a stairway to heaven. There have been songs and books written about that too. But when angels coming up and down, but man, and then the promise again, similar to what his dad got and that he got, is that his descendants would be like the dust of the earth, too numerous to count. But I think of a stairway too as like we are climbing. As we climb in consciousness and positive outlook on life and all of that, that is the benefit of that. That is a blessing, and it's a birthright that we all have, but very few take advantage of. And how often are we willing to trade it for a metaphorical bowl of soup, for momentary pleasures versus being long-term thinking? Wow, this is so good. And then finally, there was another experience he had. I don't know, even think we can call it a vision, because it's not presented that way. It's presented as a real event where he actually wrestles with God. He sees God as a man, much like his father did when the three men visited Isaac and told him again about the vision of his descendants, and even the upcoming birth, and him. Maybe that was Abraham. Wait, I'm going back to Abraham. Sorry. See, there's so many. It's easy to get these people confused. Abraham was visited by God himself as a man. And so Jacob is visited by a man, and they wrestle with them. And he says, I'm not going to let go of you until you bless me. And the man, God, knew that he wasn't going to win. And so he did bless him, but also in the process of that wrestling, he did dislocate his hip, and that Jacob would then walk with a limp from then on as a sign. And wow, that was something pretty significant too. Like, he was bold, and he was bold in just going after what he wanted, even at the own maybe kind of cost to himself, delayed gratification. Um, and but even in delayed gratification, maintaining an attitude of gratitude, keeping his eye on the prize, and even looking backwards to remember his humble beginnings. Like, I walked into this land with only a walking stick. And we can get so used to our new normal that we forget to look back and remind ourselves where we came, keep ourselves humble. And so when I was initially sitting down to read this and was reading, you think of birthrights and blessings and you knew that his father had a great wealth too, that I was even thinking, well, why should he even have to go off and create his own fortune? He should just be inheriting his dad's. But he wasn't dying at the time. So the blessing may involve a lot of work, a lot of delayed gratification. It's an attitude. It's an attitude of gratitude, and a perspective, and climbing that stairway within towards higher consciousness and control of your feelings and your perspective, and choosing to see life as happening for you, even in the unfair moments, and just getting in line. Okay, this is what I've got to do now. Again, it's kind of a stoic attitude as well, of just getting neutral and going, okay, yep, I thought it was going to be one way. And rather than getting caught up in the shoulds and getting angry and all of that, those feelings, he didn't dwell on it. He got over it. He got mad about it, but then he got over it and got on with it. That's a lot that we can learn too. Anyway, so I have talked for quite a bit today because, 10 chapters in Genesis and the big story of Jacob. So hopefully you'll read that for yourself, and I'd love to hear what it speaks to you. But man, it was a good reminder for me today to stay in an attitude of gratitude and remember that life is always happening for me, not to me. All right. See you tomorrow.